of the Pretrip for Waukesha County Technical College's truck driving program. First, we want to start with our emergency equipment. We're going to go into the cubby and make sure that we have 3 reflective triangles. We have a fire extinguisher that's mounted securely and fully charged. And we have spare fuses here to make sure if they blow, we have some extra ones. Alright. Now we're going to move on to the trailer. We're going to start with the front of the trailer. We got to check to make sure all the nuts, bolts, rivets, and screws are tight, none are missing. The front of the trailer, which could be considered the frame, nothing's bent, cracked, missing any pieces, twisted. We're going to check our registration to make sure it's there and that it's valid. Sometimes it has a metal box on the front of the trailer, which would hold the registration as well. We're going to continue to the side of the vehicle while checking the top and the bottom, checking to make sure our clearance lights, our marker lights are clean and free of debris, that they're the proper color, they're mounted securely, nuts and bolts that hold them on are tight. As we make our way down the side of the vehicle, we're checking all the nuts, the bolts, the rivets, along the entire side of the vehicle, top and bottom, along with the frame, making sure nothing's cracked, missing, loose. We're going to check our reflective tape to make sure our reflective tape is clean and free of debris, has no less than 50% of it on the trailer. We're going to check our bottom rails, our top rails, and our side rails, and our cross members underneath here, checking to make sure nothing's bent, twisted, cracked, or missing any nuts or bolts. As we make our way down the side of the vehicle, we're going to come across the landing gear, and we're going to check the landing gear for structural integrity. We're going to check all the nuts, the bolts, the rivets. We're going to give it a good tug, make sure nothing is broken loose. All the nuts and bolts on the brackets and braces underneath here are not loose, cracked, or missing any pieces. Our landing gear is wound all the way up where it should be, and our handle is securely mounted in its holder. As we make our way down the side of the vehicle, we're going to continue to check the bottom, top, and sides of the trailer. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, twisted, missing any pieces. Our nuts, bolts, and rivets are all tight and none are missing. We're going to continue to check the cross members underneath the trailer, checking to make sure none are missing, none are cracked or bent, and there's no holes in the floor. We're going to check our turn signal here, or our marker light, checking to make sure that's the proper color, clean, free of debris, nuts and bolts or screws that hold it on are tight, and the electrical behind it is not corroded or loose. We're going to continue to check the reflective tape as we walk down the side of the vehicle. I'm going to check my air and electrical lines underneath the vehicle, make sure they are securely mounted and they're not hanging too close to the ground. They should be at least 12 to 18 inches from the ground. As we make our way down the side of the vehicle, we're going to check the frame of the tandem, slider, and we're going to check to make sure the frame is not cracked, bent, or twisted. We're going to check to make sure our button right here is in the proper position. We're also going to check to make sure that our locking pins right here and down here are locked in position. All right? Holding the tandem release in place. We're going to go underneath the vehicle here, and we're going to check out our components underneath the vehicle. All right? Again, we want to pick one axle, either the front axle or the rear axle of the trailer, and talk about all the components on that axle. I'm going to pick the front axle. I'm going to talk about the brake hose that leads into the brake chamber. My hose is not cut, frayed, worn, or bulged. My brake hose fitting is tight. My brake chamber is not bent, cracked, missing any pieces, or excessively rusted. I'm going to check my brake Slack adjuster in the back here. Checking to make sure my slack adjuster is properly greased, not bent, cracked, or missing any pieces. I'm also going to check my push rod right here, making sure my push rod is not cracked, bent, or missing any pieces. My cotter pins and my nuts and my bolts here are tight. I'm going to check my brake drums and my brake linings. My brake drums right here, no cracks, no missing pieces. My brake linings, same thing, no cracks, no missing pieces. And my brake linings have no less than a 1/4 inch of material. I'm going to check my shock absorber, which is right here, the bottom mounts and the top mounts. Checking to make sure that their nuts and bolts are tight. I'm going to check my shock absorber right here. I'm going to give it a nice little tug, make sure it's not loose. And I'm going to check the bottom of my shock to make sure that there's no liquid, indicating a possible problem with my shock that is broken. I'm going to check my airbag and my top mount and my bottom mount, make sure nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. I'm also going to check my airbag to make sure my airbag's not cracked, not bulged, frayed, or worn. As I make my way outside from underneath the vehicle, I'm going to check my wheels. I'm going to check the insides and outsides of my tires. Make sure there's no cuts, cracks, or bulges. I'm going to check my tread, make sure there's no cord showing on either tire. And I'm going to check my tread depth with a tread depth gauge, make sure there's no less than 2/32 of material. I'm going to check my bud rims on the inside here, making sure my bud rims, there's no space in between them. I'm also going to check to make sure there's no debris in between the wheels here, indicating or that could possibly cause friction and heat up and start a fire. As I come outside the vehicle, I'm going to check my valve stem. This happens to have an autofill on it, so I can check my air pressure right here with the air pressure gauge, checking to make sure my air pressure is between 90 and 95 psi. I'm checking to make sure my valve stem is not cracked, bent, or broken. And I'm also checking to make sure my valve stem cap is on there and it's tight. I'm going to check my rim, make sure my rim is not bent, cracked, or welded. I'm going to check my lug nuts, make sure my lug nuts are tight. They are tight and there are no rust streaks indicating possible looseness. I'm going to check my hub oil seal right here, making sure my nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. I'm going to check my hub oil level to make sure it's between add and full. And I'm going to check to make sure that there are no leaks coming from the hub oil seal. As I make my way down the side of the vehicle, I'm going to continue to check the frame, the nuts and bolts, make sure there's nothing cracked, no missing pieces. I'm going to check my mud flap. Make sure my mud flap, nuts and bolts that hold it on are tight. The frame that holds it is not cracked, excessively welded, or bent. I'm going to check to make sure my mud flap. As I make my way to the back of the trailer, I got to check my door tie. Checking my door tie to make sure nuts and bolts or rivets that hold it on are tight. It's not loose. I'm going to check my ABS light to make sure my ABS light is the proper color. Should be the only light on the back of the trailer that's amber. Make sure it's clean and free of debris. Nuts and bolts that hold it on or screws that hold it on are tight. And the electrical on the back is not corroded and it's not loose. As I make my way down the side of the vehicle, I want to check this light as well. I want to check to make sure it's clean and free of debris. Nuts and bolts and screws that hold it on are tight. Wires on the back are not loose and they're not corroded. I'm going to make my way down the side of the vehicle to the back. What I'm going to do is I'm going to check my hinges. Make sure my hinges are not bent, cracked, or missing any pieces. I'm going to check my door latches here. Make sure my door latches are latched properly here, and at the top. To make sure my doors are latched properly. I'm also going to check my door ties right here to make sure they are connected properly. Nuts and bolts that hold them on are tight. All right, they're not loose. I'm going to check my reflective tape on the bottom of the trailer. I'm I'm also going to check to make sure it's on the top of my trailer up top, on the top corners. And I'm going to check to make sure there's reflective tape on the bottom of the trailer or the bumper. I'm going to check my lights. I'm going to check my turn signals, my four-ways, my tail lights, my brake lights, and my clearance lights to make sure they're clean and free of debris. I'm also going to do an exterior light check to make sure that they are working properly. Alright, now that I'm done with my part C, what I'm going to do is ask the tester if he could stand behind my vehicle while I go inside the driver's side seat and check all the lights. Tester, can you please check my rear of my trailer, the rear of my tractor, the side of my trailer, and the side of my tractor lights? Thank you. This concludes the Part C video, pre-trip video.